There we go. It's very hard to follow literal heroes in our community, so thank you for your service. I'm actually a military kid, so I understand that lifestyle very well. So my name is Anna Kent. I'm going to be talking to you, obviously, about my personal journey, just like everybody else. Really, it comes down to two overarching themes. None in any particular order, but the first I'll talk about is balance. So when you're a student at Notre Dame, it comes down to student life balance. Now we talk about it as work-life balance, as well as leaps of faith. So in my life, I've been very blessed to oftentimes have choices between two or more really good options. When you're growing up, you sort of think that the world is black and white, and then you become an adult and you realize it's not that at all. Oftentimes it's both, like I said, really good options. And so I've used balance, and my family relied on them to help me make those decisions. And for me, at least, it's turned out very well. So the first choice I'll talk about was even the decision to come to Notre Dame. I applied to 30 schools. I have yet to hear anyone come even close to that number, so if you have, come up to me later. 30 schools, and the day before I needed to decide, I was still down to 5 or 6 good choices. My uncle demanded that I pick, and I said Notre Dame. To this day, I don't know why, but I stuck with it stubbornly, and here I was. And you know, honestly, I wasn't really sure if that was the right leap of faith, the right choice the first year. I probably, like many students, experienced a culture shock. My family, back to grandparents, great-grandparents, a lot of them had gone to college, so I wasn't first generation by any means, but they're Puerto Rican. So their experience going to the University of Puerto Rico was very different than a D1 school with, you know, an on-campus dorm. Especially Notre Dame, you're usually there for 2, 3, 4 years. So that was very, very different, a culture shock to me. Plus, academically, I struggled that first year because I actually had to try. My high school graduating class was 23 people. I didn't really have to try that much. It was a very big culture shock. So much so that I even considered transferring, and I called my parents and I said, you know what, I think I want to go back home to where my friends are. And they said, you know, we'll support you if that ends up being your choice, but why don't you wait out the first year? Like, let's see how you feel after that. And so I did, and I'm very glad I did. My sophomore year, I eventually made friends. I got into a groove academically. This top picture there is us graduating, the close friend group that I had, and Notre Dame used that picture in a lot of their promotional materials. Never saw a cent. I'm sure we signed something saying they could use it at some point during our 4-year careers. But they did use that a lot. I went to PE. And then a second choice came when I was in my sophomore year, and I learned that I had been accepted to a study abroad program in France. This was really great. I'd wanted to study abroad my entire life. It was a year-long program. But unfortunately, I had met a guy. His name was Matt. And my high school self would have hit my college self over the head and thought, what are you doing, thinking about a guy and changing your plans? But I couldn't bear to be away from him for a full year. I was rapidly falling in love. And so what I did was I found balance. I ended up choosing to go for half a year. So my fall semester of my junior year, I switched from Notre Dame du Lac to Notre Dame de Paris, even though Angers was about an hour and a half southwest of there. And that ended up being a good choice. There we are. He came and visited me in the bottom left during his fall break. And then I ended up, you know, buying into this culture shock too. I failed to mention, but my freshman year, I actually wrote an essay in Como, in my writing class, that was about the culture and the cult of football that was Notre Dame. Totally a shock to me. I couldn't understand it. Went to only one game my freshman year, and actually the one picture I took of the crowd included this guy, Matt, we learned later on. But there we are, you know, I drank the Kool-Aid eventually. There we are in France, you know, 9, 10 o'clock at night, streaming the game, doing push-ups. And then this is my senior year on the top right there. I was at the undefeated 2012 season. That was my senior year. And then we had, of course, the unfortunate destruction with Alabama. And I happened to be at that game in the Alabama section. So I still have PTSD whenever I see a car with a Roll Tide sign. But again, this all turned out pretty well for me, having that balance and making that choice, being okay and understanding that it wasn't a failure to pick my personal life, and having that balance, that ended up being the right choice for me. And I, as I've spoken to some of the other honorees already, did the ring by spring, got engaged during the Easter break. And then, of course, there was that whole academic side of Notre Dame. I was a psychology major, as my introduction stated. This picture here is our senior honors thesis class. Very, very small class. I think there were only 12 of us or so. This is us presenting in Chicago at a conference, our research. And the class was taught by Professor Thomas Merluzzi. So once we were ready to go to graduate school or our next step in life, he gave us a very odd piece of advice, which was, don't be humble. Don't be humble. That's pretty strange advice, right? But he, to his credit, did go on to explain what it meant. He said, you know, Notre Dame students are a very strange brand of kids, as we all know. Not to just, you know, toot our own horns, but we're pretty brilliant, right? We're very, we're smart, we're accomplished. We can compete with others at, you know, say the Ivy Leagues of the world, you know, the Oxfords, et cetera. We can compete with those folk, but oftentimes we don't sound as if we could if we're talking about our own accomplishments. We're very humble. We say, you know, this person helped me, we did this, even though the linguistics we use to talk about our accomplishments. So he said, don't be humble because no one else is going to be there to talk about your accomplishments for you. You need to talk about them. Take ownership of the things that you've done. And so that was pretty good advice, because otherwise I probably, would have just said, you know, oh, I don't know. I'm just a student like anybody else, right? So there's obviously a time and a place for humility, but when you're in an interview, that's not the time. So I did apply to, this time only 13 graduate schools, less than 30, and I ended up choosing St. Louis University, again, because of that balance that I was feeling in my life. So I was accepted to two. One of them was arguably a better school academically, and in fact, one of the girls that I interviewed with at St. Louis University, she said, oh, you know what, you should go there. Like, she was very blunt, you should go up there. And I was really torn, but the reason I chose St. Louis University in large part was because my fiance was in St. Louis. He was a year older, he already had a good job there, and I didn't want to do long distance. And again, that worked out for me. Here I am graduating with honors, 6 months pregnant with our son, 5 years later. And also working full-time. This is me in the middle at the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. So yeah, I really enjoy my job. It allows me, as I'll get to in the next slide, to look at economic disparities by different demographic groups. And again, having that balance with my son there, 3 weeks old, his first Notre Dame game. Unfortunately, it was a loss, but that's okay. Class of 2040 still. All right, so with the job at the Federal Reserve Bank, it was also a leap of faith, honestly. So again, I studied psychology. People always ask me, how did you end up at the Federal Reserve Bank? You know, most powerful bank in the world, arguably. How did you end up there with a degree in psychology? The reason is I didn't just do psychology. I did a lot of quantitative, you know, methods, statistics, et cetera. Really loved that research side of things. And again, my husband was in St. Louis, we had a child on the way, and I knew that I didn't want to go academic, because when you do that, you kind of have to go wherever you are sent. And I wanted to stay local, so that made me pivot kind of quickly to an applied job. I didn't want to just work somewhere where I was furthering a company's bottom line, so that ended up with community development at the Federal Reserve. When I saw that job description, I felt like it really was the right place for me. So what I do, as I said, is I do research, economic research on economic disparities by various demographics. So racial, gender gaps, educational, generational, you name it. If it's a demographic, wealth gap, I've probably done it. And I've, because of that, come across a lot of startling statistics. One of which is, if you took the bottom half of families in the United States, added up all those people's wealth, their assets minus their liabilities, that bottom half of folks, they only own collectively 1% to 2% of all wealth in the US. So again, bottom half of families own collectively just 1% to 2%. And that's the state of economic wealth inequality in America. And a lot of people don't realize it, and a lot of people also don't necessarily want that. Now, what's the problem with that? The problem is that who is in that bottom half isn't randomly distributed. So Black families, Latinx families, women-headed families, families with lower education, families who are younger, they're much more likely to be in that bottom half. Now that's problematic because these disparities are they're ingrained in the statistics. They've been pretty much the same for decades. So that speaks to root causes that have to do with discrimination, especially when we're looking at racial and ethnic gaps. So the work that I've done has gotten a lot of great media attention, has gotten policymakers to take notice, and that's important because it really contributes to the conversation and allows us to move from this is the state of how things are to this is the state of where we want to be. So I've been excited and honored that I've been able to take part in that conversation and inform it with statistics. And that leads me to the final slide of today, which is pretty much all of the statistics I've looked at have been at the national level, and almost always when I present on this work, one of the questions I get is, well, what about regional differences, or how does this matter for different states or different cities? So I can't answer the different states question, but I am doing what I can to start answering it for one city in particular, St. Louis. With a data collection effort called the Gateway Wealth Project. Very beginning stages, but we're excited about it to be able to look at especially racial wealth differences in St. Louis. And this is my son when the Blues won the Stanley Cup in 2019. So again, a lot of really great opportunities I've been given, and I'm just so honored and thrilled and humbled truly to be part of this just incredibly impressive group. And I also wanted to thank the Alumni Association for having us here as well. So again, go Irish, I liked how you ended it.